The alien girl's arrival on Earth was nothing less than an event that shook the foundations of everything humanity thought it knew. She had landed not as a conqueror, but as a diplomatic envoy. Her species, the Zolorans, were technologically advanced beyond anything humans could fathom. Yet, here she was, surrounded by Earth's primitive technology, tasked with observing and studying the human race. At first, she thought it would be just another routine assignment, a simple mission to assess the growing capabilities of the humans. What she didn't expect was how deeply everything would change after one fateful encounter. Her name was Asha, a skilled warrior from the Zoloran elite, and her beauty was unparalleled in her world. A warrior at heart, she was sent not to charm or to make peace, but to observe. It had been a long-standing policy of her species to remain distant from humanity, observing them from afar. But now, with tensions rising between their species and the growing influence of the Galactic Council, the Zolorans found it necessary to understand humanity on a deeper level. Her mission was clear: find out what made humans so unpredictable, so dangerous. She would study them closely and return with all the data needed for her people to make their next move. What she hadn't anticipated was the human soldier, a man who unknowingly would alter the course of her mission forever. His name was Marcus. He was tall, with short dark hair, a strong build, and piercing blue eyes that seemed to always hold a glimmer of mischief. Unlike the other soldiers, he was calm, collected, and had an air of mystery about him. Asha had observed him from afar before, studying him as part of her research into human behavior. It wasn't long before their paths crossed in a way that neither could have predicted. It happened during a routine meeting in the human military base. Asha was there to observe the technology humans had developed for space exploration, but something about Marcus intrigued her. Perhaps it was the way he moved with purpose, the ease with which he commanded respect from his peers. There was something undeniably magnetic about him. As the meeting progressed, Asha couldn't help but be drawn to him. He spoke little, but when he did, his voice had a weight to it, a sense of authority that seemed to resonate with her on a deep level. They exchanged brief glances, each measuring the other. Despite their differences, there was a strange connection, something neither of them could ignore. By the end of the meeting, Marcus offered to show her the base's outer perimeter. It was a simple gesture, a way to continue their conversation in a more relaxed setting. Asha, ever the professional, agreed, knowing that this was part of the mission. What she didn't anticipate was how the day would unfold. They spent hours walking through the base, exchanging stories about their worlds. Hers full of alien technology and ancient histories, his of the struggles and triumphs of humanity. They talked about everything and nothing, the conversation flowing as naturally as the air they breathed. Asha found herself captivated by him, by the way he spoke of his people with such pride and determination. It was a side of humanity she hadn't seen before, something raw and real. When the sun began to set, casting an orange glow over the base, Marcus suggested they take a break. They sat on a bench overlooking a field, the quiet of the evening settling in around them. Asha, usually so composed, felt a flutter of nerves she couldn't explain. Something about the way Marcus looked at her made her feel exposed, vulnerable even. It was a feeling she hadn't experienced in a long time, and certainly not with a human. Without warning, Marcus leaned in. His breath was warm against her ear as he whispered something she didn't quite catch. But before she could respond, everything went black. When Asha awoke, she was lying in a sterile white room, a soft beeping sound filling the air. Her head ached, and her vision was blurry. Slowly, she sat up, confusion washing over her as she tried to piece together what had happened. She had no memory of what occurred after their conversation on the bench. The only thing she knew was that something had changed. She looked down at her body. At first, she didn't understand what she was seeing. Her stomach felt different, tighter than it had ever been. But as her fingers gently traced the curve of her abdomen, she felt a sharp jolt of panic. Her heart raced, and the world around her seemed to spin. She was pregnant. Asha's breath hitched in her throat as she scrambled to her feet. How could this be possible? Her species didn't reproduce in the traditional sense. Their bodies didn't work like humans, and certainly not in such a way. The thought of carrying a child, let alone one that was part human, was unfathomable to her. Panic set in. Her mind raced as she tried to make sense of what was happening to her body. She had to find answers, and fast. The first person she turned to was Marcus. She didn't know why, but she needed to confront him. She needed him to explain what had happened, to give her some kind of answer. She stormed through the halls of the base, her pulse quickening with every step. When she found him, he was in his quarters, going over some mission reports. "Asha, you're awake," Marcus said, turning toward her with a smile. But it quickly faded as he saw the look of panic on her face. "What's wrong?" Before he could say anything else, she demanded, "What have you done to me, human?" Marcus blinked, clearly taken aback by her accusation. "What? Asha, I don't understand. I haven't done anything to you." She pointed to her stomach, her voice shaking with fear. This is impossible. How did this happen?" Marcus stared at her for a moment, his expression shifting from confusion to concern. He slowly approached her, his gaze falling to her abdomen. "You're pregnant." Asha nodded, her mind struggling to comprehend the situation. "I don't understand. I'm not supposed to be. This is not how my body works. I was sent here for a mission, not to." "I swear I didn't do anything to you," Marcus said, stepping closer. "I didn't." But Asha wasn't listening anymore. Her mind was racing, trying to process the overwhelming flood of thoughts. How could she be pregnant? Why was this happening? And why with a human? Her pulse quickened again, her fear escalating. She had no answers, and for the first time, she felt truly vulnerable. There was no way out of this. Something had happened, something unexplainable, and for Asha, terrifying. As she turned away, her mind continued to whirl. She had to find a way to reverse this, to fix whatever had gone wrong. But deep down, a strange sense of dread began to settle in. She had no idea what would come next, and that thought terrified her even more than the mystery of her condition. Asha couldn't shake the feeling that something was horribly wrong. The discovery of her pregnancy had shattered everything she had known about her body, her species, and her mission. She had always thought herself to be a woman of logic and control, a warrior who had been trained to handle any situation, no matter how bizarre or dangerous. But now, as she stood there, with the weight of a life growing inside her, she felt as though the ground had been ripped out from under her. She had tried to remain calm, to think rationally about what was happening. But the more she thought about it, the more confused she became. The Zalorans had never experienced pregnancy in the way humans did. They didn't reproduce in the same biological sense. There was no need for fertilization or conception. Their species was born through a process of transformation, a change that took place within them. To find herself in this situation, carrying the child of a human, was beyond anything she could have imagined. Her mind raced as she tried to piece together how this could have happened. Had there been something in the atmosphere that had affected her biology? Was it a virus? No, it couldn't be. She had studied human biology extensively as part of her mission. This wasn't a biological disease. This was something entirely different, something alien, something human. As she wandered through the base, trying to clear her head, Asha's thoughts kept returning to Marcus. He had been with her the entire time, but he seemed just as confused as she was. He had claimed he didn't know how it happened, that he hadn't done anything to her, but there was still so much she didn't understand. How could a human, with all his primitive biology, have the power to change something so fundamental in her? Asha needed answers. She couldn't continue on like this, not knowing what had happened to her. She couldn't afford to make mistakes. Her mission was still important. Even though it felt like it had been thrown into chaos, she had to figure out what had gone wrong, how this had happened, and whether there was any way to reverse it. She decided to speak with the only person who might have some answers, the human scientist assigned to her as part of her mission. His name was Dr. Richard, and he was one of the few people at the base who had any knowledge of alien biology. He had been tasked with studying her and her physiology as part of an agreement between their governments. At first, Asha had been wary of him. Humans weren't exactly known for their understanding of alien life. But now, she saw no other choice but to ask for his help. When Asha arrived at his lab, she was surprised to find that Dr. Richard was already expecting her. He had heard of her condition, though he didn't yet know the specifics. He greeted her with a raised eyebrow, but didn't question her immediately. Instead, he motioned for her to sit, gesturing to a chair across from his desk. "You're here about your condition," he said, his tone cautious but not unkind. "I understand your confusion. Believe me, we're just as puzzled as you are." Asha nodded, her gaze fixed on him. "I need to know how this happened. How could a human do this to me? My body shouldn't be capable of this. It's not possible." Dr. Richard leaned forward, his fingers steepled together. "I've been studying human biology for years, Asha. There's nothing in our biology that should be able to cause this kind of reaction in you. We've never seen anything like it. But," he paused, as though weighing his words carefully, "there is something I've been thinking about. You said you had no memory of what happened after you and Marcus spoke outside. You don't remember anything after that, right?" Asha felt a flash of anger. "I told you, I don't remember anything. But I know something happened." Dr. Richard held up his hand, signaling for her to calm down. "I'm not suggesting anything happened intentionally, but there's something we need to consider. The human genome is complex. There are elements of human biology that we still don't fully understand. And there's something about Marcus that doesn't quite fit with the rest of us." Asha frowned. "What do you mean?" Dr. Richard hesitated, clearly unsure of how much to reveal. "Marcus, he's not entirely human." Asha's heart skipped a beat. "What are you saying? He's some kind of hybrid?" "Not exactly," Dr. Richard replied, his voice dropping to a whisper. "But there's something in his genetic makeup that's different. We've been running tests, and we've found anomalies, something that could potentially allow him to affect other species in ways we don't fully understand." Asha's mind raced. Could Marcus have been the cause of this? Was he somehow responsible for her pregnancy, or was this all just a bizarre twist of fate? "What does that mean for me?" she asked, her voice barely above a whisper. "Am I going to have this child? Is there anything I can do?" Dr. Richard leaned back in his chair, clearly uncomfortable. "That's the thing, Asha. We don't know. We don't even know if your body will be able to carry the pregnancy to term. There are too many unknowns. But there's one thing I can tell you for sure. If Marcus is involved, there's a possibility that whatever is happening inside you could be related to his genetic anomalies. You may be the first alien to ever carry a human child. That's never happened before." Asha was silent for a long moment, her mind reeling. The idea of carrying a human child was almost incomprehensible to her. How would that even be possible? And what would it mean for her future? Her mission, her life, her people, all of it seemed to be hanging in the balance. Dr. Richard's voice broke through her thoughts. "Look, Asha, I know this is overwhelming, but I promise you, we'll do everything we can to understand what's happening to you. You're not alone in this." But Asha wasn't sure if she believed him. How could she trust anyone when she didn't even understand what was happening to her body? The more she learned, the more questions seemed to arise. There was no clear answer, no simple explanation. Only confusion, fear, and the feeling that something far bigger than herself was unfolding around her. She stood up abruptly, her thoughts swirling in a storm of uncertainty. "I need to speak with Marcus," she said, her voice firm despite the fear that churned in her chest. Dr. Richard nodded. "I understand. But just remember, there's still a lot we don't know. Please, be careful." Asha didn't respond. She didn't need to. She had made up her mind. She would confront Marcus, find the truth, and whatever it took, she would figure out how to fix this, before it was too late. As she left the lab, a wave of determination washed over her. She had no idea what lay ahead, but she knew one thing for sure. She couldn't let this mystery go unsolved. Not now, not ever. Ash's heart hammered in her chest as she stood outside the small quarters where Marcus had been staying. The uncertainty that had plagued her thoughts for days now felt like a heavy weight pressing down on her chest. There were too many questions, too many unknowns, and the more she learned, the more everything seemed to spiral into chaos. She didn't understand how it had happened, how her body had become the vessel for something so human, something so foreign. The thought of carrying a child, especially one that was half human, filled her with dread and confusion. She had to confront him. Marcus had been with her the night everything changed, and though he claimed he didn't know how it happened, Asha couldn't shake the feeling that there was more to his story. Something about the way he had acted before, the way he had looked at her, almost as if he had known something she didn't, made her doubt his innocence in all this. Taking a deep breath, she pressed her hand against the door. The soft hum of the ship's machinery surrounded her, the only sound in the quiet corridor. She hesitated for a moment, unsure of what she might find on the other side. But she knew she couldn't wait any longer. She needed answers, and there was only one person who could give them to her. She knocked once, her knuckles brushing against the metal. A long moment of silence passed before the door slid open. Marcus stood there, his expression unreadable. He looked at her with a mixture of surprise and concern, but there was something else in his eyes, a flicker of something deeper, something darker. "Asha," he said, his voice low and cautious. "I didn't expect you. Is everything okay?" Her gaze was unwavering as she stepped into the room. "No, Marcus, everything is far from okay." Her voice was sharp, cutting through the tension that filled the air. "We need to talk." Marcus glanced over his shoulder, as if unsure whether to let her in. But when he met her eyes, something seemed to shift. He stepped aside, allowing her to enter the small, dimly lit room. It was sparsely furnished, just a bed, a desk, and a few personal belongings scattered around. But to Asha, the room felt like a cage. Every inch of space seemed to close in around her as she took a step further into his world. "I don't know what's going on," she continued, her voice trembling with a mix of anger and fear. "I don't know how it happened, but something's wrong. I can feel it inside me. I'm pregnant, Marcus. And I." She stopped, her throat closing up as the weight of her words settled in. "How could you let this happen? What did you do to me?" Marcus flinched at her words, his face a mask of confusion and guilt. "Asha, I swear, I didn't do anything to you." He paused, running a hand through his hair as if searching for the right words. "I don't even understand it myself. We were just talking, and then it's like everything changed. But I never wanted this. I never meant for you to." He cut himself off, his voice thick with emotion. Asha could see the truth in his eyes. She could sense the conflict inside him. But it wasn't enough. She needed to know more, needed to understand how her body had become a vessel for something so unnatural. She had always believed that their differences, species, biology, everything, made them so fundamentally apart. Yet now, as she stood here, her body carrying a piece of him, those differences felt less like a barrier and more like a curse. "Then what happened?" she demanded. "How do you explain this? Why is this happening to me? Why is my body—" "Asha, please," he interrupted, stepping closer to her. "I wish I had the answers. But I've been trying to understand this too. I've never seen anything like it. The tests, the scans, they don't make sense. It's like your biology has shifted, changed, and I'm the only one who's been in close contact with you." He seemed to struggle with his words, almost as if the truth he was hiding was too difficult to say out loud. Asha's anger flared again, but this time, it was laced with something else, a deep, unrelenting need for answers. She couldn't keep going in circles. She couldn't keep feeling like she was drowning in her confusion. Just tell me, Marcus. What aren't you saying? What are you hiding from me? Marcus ran a hand over his face, his shoulders sagging in defeat. It's not what you think. Asha, he stopped, his gaze flickering nervously to the side. There's something you don't know about me. Something I've never told anyone. The words hung heavy in the air, and for a moment, Asha could hardly breathe. This was it. The moment of truth. Whatever Marcus was hiding, it was the key to everything that had been happening to her. She had never been more certain of anything in her life. Her hands clenched into fists at her sides, and she took a step forward, waiting for him to explain. Marcus took a deep breath and finally met her gaze. I'm not just a human, Asha, he said quietly. I'm something more. Asha's heart skipped a beat. What do you mean? He sighed, his eyes filled with regret. There's an anomaly in my genetic code. A mutation, I guess you could call it. Something that makes me different from other humans. I didn't know about it at first. But over time, I started noticing that I could affect other species in ways I didn't fully understand. And that's when I realized there's something inside me that's not entirely human. I don't know how to explain it, but it's there. And it's powerful. Asha stood frozen, trying to process his words. Her mind raced, and the room seemed to spin around her. The implications of what he was saying were too much to grasp. A human with an anomaly in his genetic makeup could alter the biology of an alien species like herself. Could he really be the cause of her pregnancy? Marcus stepped closer, his voice softer now. Asha, I never wanted this to happen. I didn't mean for any of this to unfold the way it did. But I think my genetics might be responsible for what's happening to you. It's not just an accident. It's a result of something in me that I can't control. Asha's mind reeled, but amidst the chaos of her thoughts, one thing was clear. She was carrying his child, and it was no longer just a biological oddity. It was part of him. Somehow, against all odds, their worlds had collided in a way she never could have imagined. Tears filled her eyes, but she blinked them back, refusing to let her emotions overwhelm her. What does this mean for me? For us? Can we fix it? Can we stop it? Marcus shook his head slowly. I don't know. I wish I had the answers, Asha. But this is beyond anything I've ever encountered. We have to figure this out together. I won't leave you alone in this. For a long moment, neither of them spoke. The silence between them was heavy, laden with the weight of their situation. It was a revelation that had torn apart everything Asha had known about herself and her mission. But in the quiet that followed, she realized something else. This wasn't just about the pregnancy. It was about trust, about figuring out how to navigate the unknown together, despite the impossible circumstances. And as much as she wanted to pull away from him, to run from the mess they had found themselves in, Asha knew one thing for certain. She wasn't going anywhere. Not yet. Not until she had the answers. The room felt too small now. Asha stared at Marcus, her mind a storm of confusion and fear. The weight of his revelation crashed down on her like a tidal wave, pulling her under with each passing second. She had known something wasn't right, but hearing the truth, it was worse than she had imagined. Marcus wasn't just a human. He was something more, something that had affected her in ways she couldn't understand. Her body, now carrying a child that wasn't just his, but also part of the strange anomaly he carried, felt foreign to her. Every passing day, she had felt the changes, subtle at first, but growing more undeniable. Her body was reacting in ways it never had before, and now she knew why. It wasn't just a natural pregnancy. It was the result of an impossible union between two species, two beings from completely different worlds. I didn't ask for this, Asha said, her voice raw with emotion. She clenched her fists at her sides, her nails biting into her palms. This isn't just a mistake. This is beyond anything I could have imagined. Marcus took a cautious step forward, his expression one of concern and guilt. I know, Asha. I know. I never wanted this to happen. But we have to face it. We can't run from this. Asha shook her head, tears welling up in her eyes again. How can we face this? How can we even begin to understand what's happening to me? What's happening to us? Her voice broke, and she took a step back, her head spinning as she tried to process everything. She had always been strong, had always believed in her ability to control her life, to make decisions based on logic and reason. But this was different. It was beyond her control, beyond anything she had ever faced, and it terrified her. I don't know how to help you, Asha, Marcus said quietly, his voice tinged with desperation. But I won't leave you. I'll stay by your side, no matter what. We'll figure this out together. But Asha didn't know if she could believe him. How could she trust him when his very existence had caused this? When the truth of what he was had turned her world upside down. Her emotions were in turmoil, and she felt as if she were being pulled in every direction, each thought and fear fighting for control. Her mind kept racing back to the moment when she first realized something was wrong. It had been subtle at first, just a strange fluttering sensation deep within her, a feeling she couldn't quite place. She had chalked it up to something temporary, maybe the result of stress or exhaustion. But when the symptoms continued, growing more pronounced, she knew something was wrong. The day she took the test, she hadn't expected it to be positive. She hadn't expected it to be anything at all. But as the 2 lines appeared on the screen, her breath caught in her throat, and a cold shiver ran down her spine. How could this happen? She wasn't even supposed to be able to get pregnant. But now she knew. It was Marcus. His strange genetics had somehow done this to her. Why didn't you tell me sooner? She asked, her voice trembling with anger and hurt. Why didn't you warn me about what you are? About what you're capable of? Marcus's eyes darkened with regret. I never meant to hide it from you, Asha. But I didn't fully understand it myself. It's not something I could control. And I didn't think it would ever come to this. But now that it's happened, I'll do everything I can to help you. To make things right. Asha swallowed hard, her emotions a tangled mess of confusion, pain, and fear. She felt like she was drowning in it. How could she have trusted him? How could she have allowed herself to become so vulnerable to someone whose secrets ran so deep? Do you even understand what this means for me? She asked, her voice barely a whisper. What it means for the child I'm carrying. What if this isn't just a normal pregnancy? What if there's something dangerous inside me? Marcus stepped closer, reaching out as if to comfort her, but Asha pulled away, shaking her head. Don't touch me right now. I'm sorry, he said, his voice filled with regret. I didn't mean to cause you this pain, Asha, but we don't know what's happening to you. We don't know if this pregnancy is dangerous. But I promise you, I'll find out. I'll do whatever it takes to make sure you're safe. Asha looked at him, her chest tight with emotion. She wanted to believe him. She wanted to believe that everything would be okay, that somehow this impossible situation would resolve itself. But the fear and uncertainty weighed too heavily on her. How could she trust him when she couldn't even trust her own body? The next few days were a blur of medical scans, tests, and more unanswered questions. Asha felt like a lab experiment, as if her body no longer belonged to her. The scans revealed that her DNA was changing, adapting in ways no one could explain. Her cells were becoming more resilient, her body responding to the pregnancy in ways that defied all logic. She felt the changes. Her senses were heightened, her strength was increasing, and her body was growing at an alarming rate. But it wasn't just physical changes. Asha felt something deeper, something primal stirring inside her. It was as if her very essence was merging with the human DNA that had invaded her body. She could feel the child inside her, and as much as it terrified her, she also felt a strange sense of connection to it. The bond was undeniable, but it didn't make it any easier to accept. Marcus reached out slowly, placing a hand on hers. Asha flinched at first, but then the warmth of his touch seemed to ground her. "You don't have to have all the answers right now," he said softly. "We're in this together. It's okay to not have everything figured out." Asha took a deep breath, looking at him finally. She saw the sincerity in his eyes, the unwavering commitment he had shown even when she pushed him away. It was hard to admit, but she had begun to rely on him. She had started to trust him again, even after everything that had happened. Maybe I'm not supposed to control everything," she said quietly. Maybe it's time to stop fighting and start accepting what's happening." Marcus smiled gently, squeezing her hand. "You don't have to accept it all at once. It's okay to take it step by step, but we'll face it together, no matter what comes next." For the first time in days, Asha felt a small weight lift off her shoulders. The fear, the anxiety, the uncertainty, it didn't disappear, but it didn't feel as suffocating either. She had been so focused on resisting change that she hadn't allowed herself to see what was in front of her. She wasn't alone in this. No matter how impossible the situation seemed, she didn't have to face it by herself. That night, as she lay in bed, Asha closed her eyes and allowed herself to think about the future. She didn't know what it would hold. She didn't know what kind of child she was carrying or what it meant for her, for Marcus, or for their world. But she knew one thing for sure. She was ready to move forward. She was ready to face whatever came next. And as the days passed, Asha's resolve grew stronger. She began to embrace the changes within her, even when they scared her. She started to understand that, in some strange way, this was her new beginning. She could no longer run from the future. She had to step into it, even if it meant embracing the unknown. Marcus, too, had changed. He was no longer just the man who had caused this, the one who had thrown her life into chaos. He was her partner now, someone she could rely on, someone who would stand by her through this strange journey. Their bond, forged in the fire of their shared struggle, was growing stronger each day. One morning, as Asha stood in front of the mirror, she saw herself differently. She saw the woman she had been, the woman she was becoming, and the woman she would be. The future was uncertain, but it was hers to shape. She wasn't just carrying a child, she was carrying the future. And for the first time, she wasn't afraid. When she turned to find Marcus standing in the doorway, a soft smile on his face, Asha felt a sense of peace wash over her. The journey ahead wouldn't be easy, but she no longer felt like she was walking it alone. With Marcus by her side, with the strength she had found in herself, she knew that together they could face anything. "I'm ready," she said, her voice filled with determination. "Ready for whatever comes next." Marcus stepped forward, his hand outstretched, and as she took it, she knew that they were about to embark on a new chapter of their lives. A chapter filled with uncertainty, yes, but also with hope, strength, and the promise of something beautiful, a new beginning. And in that moment, Asha realized that acceptance wasn't just about coming to terms with what had happened. It was about embracing the unknown, trusting the journey, and knowing that no matter what, they would face it together.